Haunted by the traumas of their past, the drifters are the only ones left who can brave the call of the forest and travel into the sea of leaves with their sanity intact. On their travels, drifters will be faced with opportunities to invoke and begin to heal their traumas, but with each attempt, make themselves more susceptible to heeding the call and wandering off for good. Welcome to Critical Success. I'm Adam, and today I'm talking about the second edition version of the role-playing game Summerland by Greg Saunders. Summerland takes place in a postmodern world that has been overcome by a massive forest known as the Sea of Leaves. When the forest arrived, it grew rapidly, taking over and destroying most of the civilization that spanned the globe. No one knows how or why a massive, seemingly ancient forest grew out of nowhere, but the effects of the Sea of Leaves didn't end with the growth of the trees. Shortly after the arrival of the forest, people began to hear the call, a mysterious force calling them into the forest. As if in a daze, more than 3/4 of the population wandered off from their communities to live under the trees, quickly reverting to a feral state. What few survivors were left gathered into small communities scattered throughout the landscape called survivor communities. They inhabited abandoned warehouses, supermarkets, and any other mostly intact structures they could manage to find. Afraid to wander too deep into the forest, the colonies now find themselves starved for resources, having to scavenge for what food and other provisions were left behind by civilization and grow what crops they can on the land immediately surrounding their communities. Anything but the most basic goods are all but impossible to find. The survivors of the colonies stick to within a few hours' travel of their communities, perpetually aware of the dangers of straying too far from their friends and loved ones. Not only is the forest crawling with dangerous beasts, feral humans, and rival survivor colonies competing for resources, but once night falls, the call begins to tempt even the strongest of the survivors, beckoning them to leave behind their communities and wander deep into the Sea of Leaves. When the survivors are gathered into their communities, the call seems to be less powerful, as if it has a greater effect on those that are alone, without the support of their peers. The players in Summerland take on the role of drifters, those who can resist the call and travel into the Sea of Leaves in relative safety. Drifters are all haunted by some trauma from their past which drowns out the call in their mind. Drifters tend to help communities in many ways, whether it be delivering messages between groups of survivors, spending time in the woods collecting resources, or escorting people between communities. They do this in exchange for a place to stay and the opportunity to become a temporary part of a community. This amount of comfort and security is something that comes rarely for drifters, as their trauma prevents them from ever being welcomed into a community permanently. Saunders managed to create a beautiful, multifaceted world for Summerland without ever straying too far from the familiar. There's no need for lengthy chapters detailing the rich lore of the world because it is based entirely on the modern world in which we live every day after having faced a devastating event that altered nearly every facet of life for mankind. After reading only a few pages of Summerland, I immediately felt drawn into the setting, a feat that can rarely be accomplished in mere paragraphs. Beautiful, full-color art added throughout the book depicting landscapes of the ruins of civilization and the Sea of Leaves go a long way in helping to convey the feeling of the setting. Without having to provide any named NPCs or locations, Summerland plants the seeds for countless adventures in the structure of society and the symbiotic relationship between the survivor communities and the drifters. Throughout the game, players have the opportunity to reduce their drifter's trauma by invoking it during any situation that relates back to the events that caused it. Doing so allows the players to roll extra dice and, based on the results, possibly lower the value of their trauma. Should a drifter's trauma value ever be reduced to 0, they are free from the events that have haunted them and can be welcomed into a community. It's the goal of the players to reduce their trauma to 0 so that they can escape the life of drifters and be welcomed into a society of survivors. Whenever a player chooses to invoke their trauma, however, they risk consequences. In addition to their trauma value, the drifters have a value for their stress. When players make a roll that has invoked their trauma, poor results on any of the dice will result in a reduction of their stress value. Once a character reaches a stress value of 0, they crack, causing them to have some sort of extreme reaction to the situation at hand, the severity of which is agreed upon by the player and game master. As long as a drifter's stress value remains at 0, they cannot invoke their trauma and risk cracking once more each time they roll for an action. A low stress value can be recovered from only by spending time resting within a community. The system of trauma and stress are a brilliant way of adding an end goal for each character that is baked into their backstory and interacts with the game system in a tangible way. It creates an opportunity for each drifter to have their own character arc within the campaign, giving them each a time to shine and overcome their demons. A player isn't forced out of the game once their drifter heals their trauma, of course, as there is always the opportunity for them to create a new character that joins the group in their adventures. Summerland uses the Open D6 system, a dice pool system that is built to be adaptable and rules light. Character creation is done with a few simple decisions and the allocation of skill points. The rules for skill checks and combat are equally simple and easy to pick up for anyone familiar with tabletop role-playing games, but as I've said in the past, traditional dice pool systems aren't my favorite. Once you start rolling 5 or more dice at a time and adding the results, the time between rolling and actually knowing your result becomes a little bit drawn out, taking out some of the excitement and suspense of rolling skill checks. Overall, I like the Open D6 system, and I think it fits the game well, doing everything the setting requires without any extra unnecessary rules. One thing I love about this book is how much it helps game masters get started running the game. Summerland is a game that has the capacity to cover a wide variety of genres and themes, from survival to horror and even adventure, and there are entire sections of the book which are aimed at helping new game masters navigate those themes, deciding which will be the focus and which will play a smaller part, and then creating adventures centered around those themes which retain the overall feel of the setting, providing examples of different movies, shows, and books which showcase those types of stories throughout. In doing so, Saunders creates an easy point of entry into the game, making it that much less daunting for both players and game masters. Summerland is a beautiful game that combines a simple rules-light system with a creative and evocative setting in a way that promotes meaningful storytelling and thoughtful roleplay. The efforts put in to help players and game masters in beginning a campaign of Summerland make for all the more reason to try it out, even just for a short adventure. But of course, there is no role-playing game out there that's for everyone, so before finishing I have to mention who this game is not right for. If you're looking for an epic game of heroism and triumph, this one probably isn't for you. Summerland incorporates heavy themes of remaining hopeful in a deadly and desolate environment and overcoming the challenges of surviving through each day. Campaigns can involve triumph and hope, but rarely will they reach the level of heroism found in many other games. The gritty elements of both the setting and system make this game much more well suited to players that are interested in the suspenseful game of uncertainty in the face of danger. Overall, I absolutely love this game, and I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in taking a step back from the heroic and epic adventures of traditional fantasy role-playing and trying out something that's gritty, suspenseful, and completely unique. Well, that's going to be it for today. Hopefully this video helped to explain a little bit about Summerland and whether it's the right game for you. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what other games you'd like me to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. Now go play.